Right, so it takes a certain level of arrogance, nerve, and depravity to bomb a hospital, fake the evidence justifying such an act, and still call it self defense. Yet Israel's military has now been exposed as having managed to do all three. For 2 years, it sold the world an underground fantasy, a network of Hamas command tunnels supposedly snaking beneath Gaza's hospitals. Many of these accusations have been debunked before, of course, but never on the scale of the findings of a recent investigation. When investigators finally collated and analysed the footage, the tunnels led not to Gaza, but to a 3D asset library, complete with borrowed scenes and textures from a Scottish museum. And it didn't stop there either. What Israel called intelligence was in fact digital fakery, stealing images from other sites in order to legitimise airstrikes on sites protected under international law. And now, as Defence Minister Israel Katz has vowed to restart tunnel destruction once all of the Israeli hostages have been freed, something that was completed yesterday, of course, the whole performance now comes full circle. The evidence was fake, the hospitals were real, and the only thing Israel actually dug was the hole it's now standing in. Scottish outlet The Ferret, which I think is the singularly best name for a media outlet in the world ever, and Switzerland's SRF. Their joint analysis of 43 Israeli Defence Forces intelligence videos found that many of the visuals depicting Hamas tunnel networks were actually computer-generated, assembled from commercial 3D asset packs, and in one notable case, from a digital scan belonging to the Scottish Maritime Museum. The videos have been circulated by Israel's military press units and broadcast internationally as authentic recordings of Hamas infrastructure, of course. But these animations were not documentation, they were complete fabrications. One of them, showing an underground weapons plant, contained identifiable imagery taken directly from the Scottish Museum's boat-building workshop model. The timing exposed a contradiction at the heart of Israel's narrative. The timing, I thought, was awfully good. The promise to destroy what it has already been caught inventing stories about. The investigation was carried out jointly by Plus 972 magazine, local Call Viewfinder, Scottish outlet The Ferret, which I think is the singularly best name for a media outlet in the world ever, and Switzerland's SRF. Their joint analysis of 43 Israeli Defence Forces intelligence videos found that many of the visuals depicting Hamas tunnel networks were actually computer-generated, assembled from commercial 3D asset packs, and in one notable case, from a digital scan belonging to the Scottish Maritime Museum. The videos have been circulated by Israel's military press units and broadcast internationally as authentic recordings of Hamas infrastructure, of course. But these animations were not documentation, they were complete fabrications. One of them, showing an underground weapons plant, contained identifiable imagery taken directly from the Scottish Museum's boat-building workshop model, downloaded and relabeled as evidence of militant activity. Under international law, hospitals and civilian sites retain protection unless credible proof demonstrates they are being used for military purposes. Those 3D videos had been used to provide that proof. Once shown to be manufactured, they stripped away Israel's legal and moral justification for attacking protected medical facilities. But of course, the deed has now been done, hasn't it? Katz's order now to resume tunnel destruction is therefore not something anyone should take as an expression of defence, but a signal that the same discredited rationale is just going to continue. Israel's fixation on tunnels predates the current conflict, of course. Since 2014, officials have referred to Hamas's underground passages as the central threat, justifying repeated assaults on Gaza. Over time, that claim evolved into a sweeping narrative, an underground city supposedly stretching beneath all the hospitals and the schools and the mosques where Hamas fighters were directing their operations. During the siege of Al-Shifa Hospital back in November of 2023, the IDF released glossy animated walkthroughs depicting steel-lined corridors and command rooms. Major broadcasters replayed these clips as verified intelligence, but the images didn't match the reality. There were no multi-level complexes. There was no reinforced bunker. What existed was a short, unfinished tunnel and a small concrete room. And identical videos followed for the Al-Quds Hospital, for the Kamal Adwan Hospital, the European Hospital, the Indonesian Hospital. Each featured the same aesthetic: cinematic lighting, metal doors, Arabic signage, a few flickering fluorescent bulbs for a little bit of added authenticity. Analysts later discovered repeated use of identical structures and assets, revealing that many of these scenes had actually been recycled from earlier productions. They were not separate discoveries, but variations of a single digital set repackaged from multiple targets. The Scottish Maritime Museum episode demonstrated the degree of fabrication involved. A publicly available 3D model of a historic shipwrights workshop had been imported into an IDF animation and retextured to look like a Hamas tunnel chamber. Museum staff confirmed the unauthorised use after being contacted by journalists and promptly removed the file so nobody else could abuse it. Israel's army had turned cultural heritage material from another country entirely into fabricated intelligence to suit their own narrative. When challenged, the IDF spokesperson's office claimed these visuals were illustrative, yet the same clips had been released as factual proof to the international press. The distinction between illustration and evidence was erased at the precise point it mattered the most, when Israel was authorising attacks on hospitals. At that point, the illusion disintegrated. Israel was caught presenting digital artwork as battlefield evidence. After this investigation became public, independent teams cross-checked the locations shown in the animations. None of the large tunnel networks claimed by Israel were found. Satellite imagery shows no excavation or structural disturbance of the scale portrayed. Journalists on controlled military tours saw only shallow shafts and small concrete chambers. The specific claim that rifles were hidden behind MRI machines in Al-Shifa Hospital collapsed under basic physics, as I pointed out before. MRI scanners generate enormously strong magnetic fields. Metallic weapons placed nearby would have been drawn in and destroyed the equipment instantly. These machines can fold up hospital beds. Radiology experts rightly dismissed the idea as impossible, yet the claim persisted because it served a political purpose. There are the photographs. How can you doubt them? To reframe hospitals as legitimate military targets. The exposure of these falsehoods renders Israel's hospital attacks indefensible. Under the Geneva Conventions, protected sites cannot be struck on the basis of speculation. The repeated pattern, allegation, bombardment, lack of verification, all shows a deliberate strategy of manufacturing pretext rather than evidence. So while the story of fabricated tunnels was still unraveling, Israel began to describe its withdrawal from northern Gaza as compliance with the ceasefire. On the ground, it looked like nothing like a truce. Witnesses reported that departing soldiers were setting fire to homes and shops and agricultural land. Israeli authorities described this as demolition of terror infrastructure, as if there was very much left standing anyway. Yet those fires consumed bakeries and schools and water facilities, structures with no military value whatsoever. Residents described soldiers pouring fuel through doorways and igniting it before departure. The scale of the damage pointed not to military necessity, but to punitive destruction. It was wanton destruction. So once access returned to these districts, recovery teams found over 300 bodies buried in the rubble. Civilians killed in areas previously inaccessible under bombardment. The supposed ceasefire had simply changed the method of attack from airstrikes to arson. The destruction served another purpose as well. It erased potential evidence of war crimes and made vast neighbourhoods uninhabitable. In the same week that Israel's tunnel fabrications were exposed, its troops were burning the physical spaces where truth might have been documented. Israel's portrayal of its prisoner release program followed the same formula of contradiction. Officials celebrated the release of roughly 2,000 Palestinian detainees as a humanitarian gesture under the ceasefire framework. Yet more than 150 of them were not released to freedom, they were deported instead. In the West Bank, where many of the released prisoners lived, Israeli forces raided family homes before they could return to them. Residents of Jenin or Tulkarem and Bethlehem described pre-dawn raids in which soldiers overturned furniture and confiscated personal belongings. These actions turned what should have been a moment of relief into another form of collective punishment. The image of humanitarianism presented to foreign media contrasted sharply with the reality on the ground. The same state that claimed to release prisoners was simultaneously destroying their homes. The logic of control remains completely unchanged, therefore. Release, exile, or rearrest all ended up being expressions of dominance presented as security. In most democracies, exposure of falsified evidence would lead to some accountability. In Israel, it produces escalation. The revelation that the tunnel videos were fabricated has not prompted investigation more widely, though it may end up being sent to the ICC and ICJ as further evidence. It triggered renewed vows instead to finish the job. Katz's declaration to resume tunnel destruction was less a shift in policy than a reassertion of the lies they fabricated. And this cycle of lie, exposure and retaliation has become self-sustaining. Criticism from abroad ends up being repackaged domestically as proof of hostility. Each debunking reinforces the government's claim that Israel is under siege, not only militarily but morally. So the result is a closed feedback loop where the exposure of a lie becomes the pretext for the next act of violence. The joint investigation revealed more than deceit. It documented the institutional machinery behind it. Israel's military had fused intelligence, media, and public relations into a single communication system. Visual proof packages are created by technicians and designers, distributed through official military channels, and presented to global media as verified intelligence, which they lap up seemingly unquestioningly. At the centre of this process is the Digital Combat Intelligence Centre, where 3D modelers and data specialists generate what the Army calls visual operational outputs. These are not after-action summaries, they are preemptive narratives designed for political consumption. By the time an operation begins, its justification already exists in visual form, even if it has been completely fabricated. And this approach allows Israel to control the narrative environment as thoroughly as if it really existed physically. It no longer needs to hide evidence, it can create its own, because whoever questions them? The exposure of the fabricated tunnel videos demonstrates how this system functions. The deception was not an accident, it was the operational norm. International humanitarian law is clear. Knowingly presenting false evidence to justify attacks that cause civilian deaths can amount to perfidy, a prosecutable war crime. If fabricated visuals were used to legitimise strikes on hospitals, the responsibility extends beyond those who produced the videos as well to those who ordered or authorised the attacks too. The government that endorsed Israel's actions and claims share that responsibility too. Officials in Washington, London and Berlin repeated Israel's assertions about Hamas command centres beneath hospitals long after local journalists and humanitarian organisations had disproven them. Continued arms shipments and diplomatic shielding in the face of exposed falsehoods constitute complicity in the resulting crimes. These revelations also undermine the credibility of international institutions. When false evidence is accepted in official briefings or at the United Nations without verification, it corrodes the system designed to enforce the laws of war. Israel's digital fabrications have therefore done damage far beyond Gaza. They've weakened the very framework that defines truth in conflict. Behind the data and the legal analysis are human consequences that cannot be ignored either. Hundreds of bodies being recovered from the ruins of Gaza since the ceasefire began from areas that people can now get into. Thousands of displaced people remain in makeshift shelters, having been rendered homeless. The hospitals that once sustained the enclave's healthcare system is gone, destroyed on the basis of fabricated intelligence. Doctors now work in tents powered by generators. Families returning to inspect their homes find blackened shells or fields reduced to ash. The physical landscape reflects the moral one. Evidence has been erased, testimony has been buried, survivors left with nothing to return to. Every single statistic represents a life distorted or ended by a policy built on lies, on deceit, on the deliberate destruction of infrastructure, so it ensures the continued humanitarian collapse there. By destroying the physical evidence of its own crimes, Israel has also destroyed the evidence of Palestinian existence in those places. The term Hamas tunnel has now ceased to be a geographic term, therefore. It's now a political instrument. A myth that sustains a permanent state of aggression because of what Israel have been exposed to have done. Even if real tunnels exist in some places, because of the distortion of the truth, every one of them is now shadowed by doubt. The tunnels now exist mainly in archived press releases and in the remnants of the fabricated videos, regardless of their real or imaginary existence. A government that has been caught manufacturing its own evidence cannot expect its word to stand unchallenged. Katz's promise to destroy tunnels is therefore not a statement of defence, but a confession of intent to just carry on repeating the same crimes with exactly the same pretext. Israel's credibility collapsed a long time ago. I don't know what the word for this is right now anymore. It certainly cannot claim discovery when it has been shown creating what it claims to find. It cannot invoke self-defence when the threat was rendered up on a computer. It cannot invoke humanitarian law while exiling hostages and burning civilian districts. The tunnels were digital, but the deaths were real. If the world treats this exposure as yesterday's news, the genocide is just going to resume and continue with all the same digital forgeries and believed in exactly the same way. The tunnel scandal reveals not only how Israel operates, but how the international community enables it. This should be a massive global story right now. Instead, it's going widely ignored. Major media outlets repeated the IDF's claims without verification, though. Governments cited the same false evidence to justify arms transfers and veto accountability measures. The result is a global ecosystem where propaganda circulates faster than investigation does. This dependency on Israeli intelligence is political. It's not accidental. Accepting fabricated proof spares allies the moral cost of condemning their partner. Where was the verification of any of it, given how much some media outlets sell us the need to verify or fact-check stuff these days that politicians tell us? If this didn't apply to Israel, did it? To question the evidence would be to question the alliance between West and the genocidal apartheid state, and we can't have that, can we? That's why each new exposure is treated as an isolated mistake rather than a pattern. The consequence is the slow normalization of digital deception as a tool of war. Once governments learn that computer-generated images can be accepted as proof, the precedent will spread. International law, which depends on verified evidence, will end up being eroded by design. Israel's use of fabricated tunnel footage, therefore, matters beyond Gaza. It's the first recorded case of a state using synthetic visuals as a foundation for real-world military targeting. The collapse of that evidence is not only a moral failure for Israel, but a warning for every state that relies on manufactured perception to justify force. The facts are now established. Israel used fabricated imagery to justify attacks on Gaza's hospitals. Its forces withdrawing under ceasefire set fires that destroyed civilian infrastructure. More than 300 bodies have been recovered in the aftermath of all of that. 2,000 Palestinian hostages were released, 150 of them exiled by Israel, though. Each of these actions has been verified by on-the-record reporting. Together they form a single picture, a government conducting war through deception, burning the evidence when caught and continuing under new pretexts. The exposure of the fake tunnel videos has removed the last claim to legitimacy they could possibly have had, surely. It's genocide built on lies. The only question left is how much longer the world will pretend not to see what's already been proven over and over again, as this story being ignored implies will be the only outcome. For more on Katz's plans, the fact he posted intent to resume tunnel operation on Twitter before Israeli hostages were freed, confirmation, especially against the backdrop of Israeli atrocities still being committed during the ceasefire period. Check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.